Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really crucial and often misunderstood health issue, substance use disorders, or SUDs. We've gathered some pretty deep academic and clinical research here. Our aim is to give you a comprehensive and definitely non-judgmental perspective.
Yeah, our mission today is really to get past that old, frankly harmful idea of addiction just being some kind of moral failing. We want to show why it's absolutely vital to understand it as a complex, chronic disease. We'll be distilling the core science, looking at the powerful biological and social drivers, and outlining what truly integrated recovery can look like, especially here in Canada.
That paradigm shift you mentioned, it feels so critical, and it really starts with the science, doesn't it? Like the American Society of Addiction Medicine, hey Sam, they define addiction specifically as a primary chronic disease, one that affects brain reward, motivation, memory, all those related circuits.
Exactly. And if you accept that premise that it's a chronic disease, not a failure of will, well, that changes everything about how we approach it.
It really does. It shifts the whole question. It's no longer, why can't they just stop?
Right. Instead, we ask, what forces, biological, psychological, social, are driving this compulsive behavior?
Hmm.
And to even start answering that, we first need to get on the same page about the spectrum of substance use.
Absolutely, because how we talk about this stuff matters hugely. The language we use can literally influence whether someone feels safe enough to ask for help.
Hmm.
Our sources really emphasize using non-stigmatizing language and, distinguishing between different patterns of use along a kind of continuum.
Right. So you can think of it starting with use that might actually be beneficial, like maybe that first coffee in the morning genuinely helps you focus. Then there's non-problematic use, casual use, really negligible impact.
But then there's this shift, this move into problematic use. That's where you start seeing negative consequences, maybe impaired driving or binge drinking. But the person might still feel they have some control.
And the far end of that spectrum is dependent use. That's marked by habitual compulsive use, even when the negative consequences are piling up, becoming really significant. And at this stage, the clinical signs are clear. Things like tolerance needing more and more to get the same effect.
And dependency itself, right, where use basically continues just to avoid the awful feeling of withdrawal.
Precisely. And withdrawal symptoms can range from just feeling uncomfortable to, really life-threatening issues like delirium tremens with alcohol withdrawal.
Okay, so that clinical reality, that dependency means losing control. It raises a huge question. What's happening biologically that's powerful enough to override our rational thinking? Let's get into the neurobiology, because this is where the data, well, it's pretty staggering.
Yeah, this is exactly why we call it a brain disease. It really boils down to the brain's reward system, and specifically a neurotransmitter called dopamine, or DA. Dopamine is all about motivation reinforcement. It tells your brain, hey, this is important, do it again.
And the sources give us numbers here. If you look at natural rewards, things we evolved to seek out, they give you a dopamine bump. Like eating good food might push dopamine up to maybe 150% of its normal baseline level.
Sex might push it to about 200%. Those are strong signals from our brain.
Okay, but now compare that to drugs. Cocaine. That hits around 350% of baseline dopamine.
Amphetamine, get ready for this. It spikes dopamine up to something like 1,100% of the normal level. 1,100%.
Wow, that's not even in the same league as natural rewards. It's a biological tidal wave.
Exactly. It's not a choice in the way we normally think of choice. It's a biological imperative completely taking over the controls.
And our sources explain that this constant, massive flooding actually changes the brain over time. It reorganizes the circuits. So the parts responsible for saliency, that intense magnetic pull of the substance and drive, gets stronger and stronger.
While at the same time, the circuits for control, for executive function, making rational decisions, those get weaker. The substance literally becomes the brain's top priority.
But it's not just biology in a bubble, right? The mechanism might be biological, but the things that pull the trigger are often psychological, social.
That's absolutely right. And that's where the biopsychosocial model comes in. It forces us to look at the whole picture, biology, psychology, and the social environment all interacting.
We know genetics are a factor. Addiction does tend to run in families. But what I found really fascinating in the research was the focus on epigenetics.
Ah, yes, epigenetics. It's this idea that our environment, including things like heavy substance use itself, can actually change how our genes work. It doesn't change the DNA sequence, but it can sort of flip gene switches on or off.
And those changes, those functional changes, might even be passed down across generations.
That's the implication, yes. It adds this whole other layer. And environment, crucially, includes those big societal issues.
Like trauma. The sources are really clear on this. Trauma, especially stuff like adverse childhood experiences or ECEs, makes people incredibly vulnerable. People often start using substances to numb that emotional pain, which in turn physically changes the parts of the brain dealing with stress and emotion.
And then you have to zoom out even further to the social determinants of health. Things like persistent poverty, being marginalized, facing discrimination, not having access to decent health care.
These aren't small factors, they are huge drivers. When life is just relentlessly hard because of these systemic issues, substances can become, well, a way to cope, a survival mechanism almost.
Which brings us pretty directly to the situation here in Canada. Looking at the Canadian context, alcohol is still the most widely used substance. Something like 78% of Canadians over 15 report using it.
And here's a statistic that jumped out at me from the sources. Binge drinking rates among Canadian men apparently rank the highest in the world. That's surprising.
It is quite stark. And another worrying pattern is that young people, those aged 15 to 24, use drugs at significantly higher rates than older adults.
That suggests potential problems down the line for that demographic.
It does. And we also see how these broader social forces have a disproportionate impact. For Indigenous communities in Canada, the death rate linked to alcohol is actually twice that of the general population.
And the research connects that directly back to the intergenerational effects of historical trauma, colonization.
Yes, which underscores why care must be culturally appropriate, trauma-informed. It can't be a one-size-fits-all approach.
The complexity just keeps layering up, especially when we look at concurrent disorders. This is when someone has both a substance use disorder and another mental health disorder at the same time.
Right, sometimes called dual diagnosis. And it's incredibly common. The stats show that over half, more than 50% of people in treatment for an SUD also have a diagnosable mental health condition.
So we're rarely dealing with just one isolated issue.
Very rarely. And the crucial insight here is that these disorders, they feed off each other. They interact and make each other worse, which is why trying to treat one while ignoring the other it usually doesn't work very well.
The sources give some specific numbers on this interaction, this comorbidity. For people with bipolar disorder, the rate of having a concurrent SUD is incredibly high, 56%.
For schizophrenia, it's also very high, around 47%.
And for major depression, it's about 27%. Anxiety disorder is around 24%.
It really paints a picture of why treatment needs to be integrated. You have to address the whole person, the whole constellation of issues, not just the substance use in isolation.
And right now, addressing the whole person in Canada absolutely means confronting the opioid crisis head on. We officially declared a national public health crisis because of fentanyl overdoses.
Fentanyl.
Oh.
It's synthetic, has no smell, no taste, no color, and it's just vastly more potent than heroin. It completely changed the landscape of risk.
The speed at which it took over is terrifying. The data from British Columbia, for instance, in 2012, fentanyl was involved in maybe 5% of overdose deaths.
Just 5 years later, by 2017, that number had jumped to 81%. 81%.
An absolutely astronomical rise, and it hasn't stopped. Since 2016, Canada's seen over 52,500 opioid-related deaths. And in 2024 data, fentanyl is involved in nearly 3/4 of those deaths, 74%.
It's a devastating toll, and it highlights the urgent need for immediate, life-saving interventions.
Which brings us to naloxone, often known by the brand name Narcan. It's an opioid antagonist.
Right, meaning it blocks the effects of opioids at the receptor level in the brain. Crucially, it reverses the respiratory depression, the slowing and stopping of breathing, which is what actually causes death in an overdose.
It's safe, effective, been used medically for a long time.
Absolutely. But the key thing our sources stress, especially with fentanyl, is how long naloxone lasts. It starts working fast, usually within 3 to 5 minutes, but its effects start wearing off after only about 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay, that's really important. Because potent opioids like fentanyl can last much longer in the system.
Exactly. So one dose of naloxone might not be enough. The person could slip back into overdose. Multiple doses might be needed. And it's absolutely critical to always call 911 or emergency services immediately, even if naloxone has been given and the person seems to revive.
Okay, that's vital safety information. Let's shift gears a bit now towards the solution side. Modern approaches to treatment and recovery. It's not just one thing, right? It's more of a continuum of care.
Definitely a continuum.
Yeah.
It often starts with engagement. This phase is all about building trust, assessing where the person is at in terms of their readiness to change. We often use frameworks like Prochaska and DiClementi's stages of change here.
Yeah.
Moving from pre-contemplation, where someone isn't even thinking about changing, through contemplation, preparation, action, and then maintenance.
And if someone isn't ready for, say, abstinence-focused treatment yet,
Then the focus shifts. It might be on reducing harm, keeping them safe, maintaining that therapeutic relationship until they are ready to move forward. You meet people where they are.
okay, so after engagement comes active treatment. What does that typically involve?
That usually involves a mix of things. Individual or group therapy, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or motivational interviewing are common. Plus, medical support where needed. And really importantly, skill building, learning coping strategies, managing triggers, things like that.
And then long-term, the focus becomes relapse prevention.
Yes. And a key distinction the sources make here is between a lapse and a relapse. A lapse is seen more as a single slip-up, maybe a brief return to use. It's viewed not as a failure, but as an opportunity to learn something. What triggered it? What could be done differently next time?
Whereas a relapse is more of a return to those previous, more established patterns of use.
Exactly. And the stats here are pretty sobering. Our sources indicate that up to 90% of people might experience relapse potential. And interestingly, it often happens not right away, but in the second year after stopping active treatment.
The second year, wow, that's later than I might have guessed. That feels like a really high-risk window.
It really is. Which is why relapse prevention strategies are so crucial, identifying personal triggers, developing solid coping skills, building strong support systems. It's ongoing work.
And sometimes medication can be part of that ongoing support, particularly for alcohol use disorder. You mentioned naltrexone earlier. How does that tie back to the dopamine pathways?
Right, so naltrexone works by blocking opioid receptors in the brain. While alcohol isn't an opioid, those receptors are involved in the pleasurable, rewarding feelings alcohol can produce. So by blocking those receptors, naltrexone basically dampens the reward signal from alcohol. It can reduce cravings and make drinking less appealing, less reinforcing.
Okay, so it reduces the biological pull. What about the other main one mentioned, disulfiram or antabuse? That
Right.
works differently, right?
Very differently, yeah. The sulfiram interferes with how the body metabolizes alcohol. If someone drinks while taking it, they really sick, flushing, nausea, vomiting, headache. It creates a strong negative physical reaction. So it acts purely as a deterrent. The person learns, if I drink on this medication, I will feel awful. It requires a high level of commitment.
So these are tools in the toolbox. But underpinning a lot of modern strategy is this philosophy of harm reduction. Can you break that down for us?
Sure, harm reduction is fundamentally pragmatic. It starts by acknowledging that, well, people use substances, including in ways that aren't medically sanctioned, and that's just a reality. So instead of focusing solely on stopping the use itself, harm reduction aims to reduce the negative consequences associated with that use. It focuses on minimizing harm to the individual and the community.
So it's about safety first, meeting people where they are, respecting their autonomy.
Exactly. Key principles include pragmatism, respecting human rights, and focusing on the harms. It also recognizes that any positive change, even small steps towards safer use, is a success worth acknowledging.
And we see practical examples of this in Canada, right? Things that have been implemented over the years.
Absolutely. Needle distribution programs started way back in 1989 to reduce HIV transmission. Supervised consumption sites, the first official one opening in Vancouver in 2003, provide a safe space and prevent overdose deaths. And, of course, the widespread distribution of naloxone kits we already talked about. That's pure harm reduction in action.
It also involves providing information, right? Like
Yeah.
safer use guidelines.
Yes. While the ideal message from a public health perspective might be the only completely safe use is no use, harm reduction provides strategies for people who are going to use.
Yeah.
Things like start with a small test dose, start low, go slow, try not to use alone, avoid mixing different substances because that increases risk, know the signs of overdose, and have naloxone ready.
All makes sense. But running up against all these scientific advancements, all these practical strategies, is this huge barrier we keep mentioning, stigma.
It's massive. Stigma refers to those negative attitudes, those beliefs that lead to prejudice and discrimination against people who use substances or people with SUDs. It's often rooted in stereotypes, the thinking part. That leads to prejudice, the feeling part, like fear or judgment. And that results in discrimination, the behaving part, like denying housing or jobs or even just treating someone poorly.
And the real tragedy of stigma, as our sources point out, is that it actively harms people. It makes them feel shame, guilt. It makes them hide their use.
Which often means using alone in unsafe environments.
Mm-hmm.
And in the era of fentanyl, using alone can be a death sentence. You overdose, there's no one there to call for help, no one to give naloxone. So stigma isn't just hurtful, it's literally contributing to overdose deaths. It's a major barrier to people even seeking help in the first place.
So, wrapping this all together, what's the main takeaway for you listening to this?
I think the core message is that substance use disorders are genuinely complex, chronic health conditions. They require comprehensive, integrated care that looks at the biology, the psychology, and the social context, all at the same time. And recovery. Recovery isn't necessarily just about stopping substance use. The sources define it more broadly as improving one's overall quality of life, focusing on individual strengths and agency.
That leads us to a final thought, something to really chew on, which comes directly from this research. If we know that social determinants, things like poverty, marginalization, trauma, are such powerful drivers of substance use, and if they fundamentally affect how well treatment even works, then how do our communities, our healthcare systems, need to change? How do we shift focus to address those root causes instead of primarily just targeting the chemical dependence itself? How do we build a society that truly supports holistic recovery?
That's a critical question, I think, for all of us. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope this discussion has offered a clearer, maybe more compassionate, and definitely science-informed look at substance use disorders.